Buckingham Palace had survived scandals, family feuds, and royal crises for generations. But this announcement was unlike anything Britain had seen before. Prince William and Princess Anne were not preparing for another temporary adjustment. They were facing a decision that could change the monarchy itself. According to the story, King Charles had made an extraordinary choice. He was stepping away from active royal duties permanently. And the most shocking part, plans for William's coronation were reportedly already moving forward. That meant the future of the crown was no longer a distant question. It was suddenly sitting on the table. But why would Charles walk away after spending his entire life preparing to be king? And what happened inside Windsor that finally convinced him to do it? That is where this story really begins. William held the statement in his hands and paused before asking one question. Was Charles certain? The answer was yes. This was not a short break. The decision meant Charles would not simply return to his duties later. The responsibility of the crown was moving toward the next reign, and immediately understood what that meant. She supported William, but she also knew that accepting her brother's decision was very different from emotionally accepting the end of his active reign. Then William opened a sealed planning folder. Inside were proposed coronation dates, guest plans, changes to the procession, and instructions to keep the ceremony focused on continuity rather than spectacle. That detail raised an even bigger question. If the announcement had only just been made, why were the coronation plans already so advanced? The answer suggested that this decision had been considered long before the public heard about it. Even the wording appeared deliberate. Palace advisors reportedly suggested softer language, but the phrase permanently stepping aside remained. Charles did not want Britain waiting for a return he had already decided would never happen. William placed the coronation documents beside his father's statement, and looked at both and quietly understood the weight of what was happening. But one question remained unanswered. Why would Charles make such a final decision after spending his entire life preparing to be king? And according to the story, the answer began inside Windsor, with a private moment that completely changed the way Charles saw his future. Behind the formal language were three family members facing three very different kinds of pain. Charles was giving up the role he had spent most of his life preparing for. William was being pushed toward the crown far earlier than he had emotionally expected. Anne stood between them, trusted by both to say the things neither brother nor nephew could easily say directly. For Charles, stepping aside was not simply about leaving royal engagements. Kingship had become the purpose of decades of preparation, duty, and sacrifice. Walking away meant giving up the role he had waited almost his entire life to fulfill. William understood succession in theory, but theory was one thing. Reality was completely different. He had expected more time to prepare himself, protect Catherine and their children, and slowly adjust to the pressure that came with becoming king. Now that timeline had suddenly disappeared. Eventually, William asked the question both men had been avoiding. Sitting across from his father, he asked whether the coronation should be delayed. Charles remained silent for a moment. He carefully moved the papers in front of him, almost as if keeping them perfectly aligned could bring order to the emotions around them. Then he finally looked up. His answer was simple. The monarchy could not remain uncertain simply because the family was struggling and was not satisfied. She told Charles that William needed honesty, not carefully chosen royal language. Then she gave William the same warning from the opposite direction. Charles's calmness did not mean he was unaffected. He had simply spent a lifetime learning how to hide emotion behind duty. But Charles had one personal request. He did not want his final months connected to the monarchy turned into a long public farewell. Too much focus on him, he believed, could create confusion and weaken William before his reign had even properly begun. The transition needed to be clear, but William refused to let that clarity look like rejection. He wanted the crown to move forward without making his father feel forgotten. William quietly told the coronation planners one thing. His father must never look discarded or defeated. Charles would have a place in the ceremony, one that honored his years of service while making it clear that the sovereign authority had moved to William. But the deeper story had begun much earlier, and remembered the night Charles first admitted that he might no longer be able to carry the full weight of the monarchy. It happened during a private evening meeting at Windsor. Charles had arrived expecting a routine review of his upcoming schedule. Instead, the meeting became the moment that changed everything. In front of him was a demanding 12-month program filled with constitutional audiences, overseas duties, state ceremonies, investitures, and major family responsibilities. Constitutional audiences are formal meetings where the monarch carries out important duties of state. They cannot simply disappear because the schedule becomes difficult. Charles read through the plans quietly. Then he stopped. He removed his glasses and asked everyone except William and to leave the room. The atmosphere immediately changed. Charles finally said what he had been avoiding for months. Reducing individual engagements was no longer enough. The crown required someone who could remain consistently available, dependable, and ready to carry its responsibilities. And Charles feared the worst outcome was leaving William trapped between two roles: heir to the throne, yet increasingly forced to act like the sovereign. That night, hesitation began turning into something much more serious: a decision. And immediately challenged Charles. She warned him that one difficult evening should not determine the rest of his reign. But Charles refused to back down. William understood what his father was really suggesting. He pushed his chair back and made one thing clear: succession could never look like a son taking advantage of his father's exhaustion. He had spent years preparing to become king, but he did not want Charles's struggle to become his opportunity. Then Charles opened a locked drawer. From inside, he took out a handwritten memorandum and placed it on the table. It outlined the conditions under which he believed he could permanently step aside, and immediately realized something important. Charles had not reached this decision that night. He had been thinking about it privately for much longer. Then he placed his signet ring beside the document and looked directly at William. "Hear this as my son before you hear it as my heir." William hesitated before touching the paper. When Anne finally told him to read it, he did. One sentence stopped him. The memorandum said that preserving the monarchy's continuity could sometimes require a sovereign to put the institution ahead of his personal attachment to the crown. William read the sentence twice. Then he stopped arguing and accepted that Charles had made up his mind, but she still disagreed about one thing: how quickly William should become king. That became the first real battle over the future reign. It wasn't fought in Parliament. It wasn't discussed publicly. It happened behind closed doors, with Charles and Anne arguing while William listened. Finally, Anne delivered the sentence that changed the atmosphere completely: "You cannot crown him as though nothing has happened to the man he is replacing." Charles wanted a faster transition because uncertainty could become dangerous. If the process dragged on, William could remain trapped between being the heir and carrying the responsibilities of a sovereign. Anne understood the logic. But she also knew something Charles seemed willing to risk. A new reign could not begin by making the old one look like it had never mattered, and rejected the idea that Charles's departure should happen so quickly that his entire reign seemed to disappear. She confronted her brother directly. "Duty has become your shield." Charles pushed back. He believed remaining only partly involved would create even more uncertainty. William could not govern properly if everyone was constantly wondering whether Charles might return. William understood both sides. But he also knew the uncomfortable truth. He was moving toward the crown because his father had chosen to step away. Finally, he asked them both to stop arguing. The transfer of responsibility, he said, could be immediate and permanent. But the coronation did not have to make Charles look forgotten. There had to be a way to show succession without erasure. And placed the first ceremonial plan on the table. William turned it over and began rewriting it himself. His idea was simple. Charles should be publicly recognized as the monarch who deliberately made room for the next generation. William would take the central oath and assume the new role, but Charles would not be treated as someone who had simply been pushed aside. And added one more demand. Charles should enter the ceremony in his own right, and be formally received before William took his oath. That single moment would send a powerful message. One reign had not been erased. It had made room for another. Charles studied the revised plan. He did not object. But now came the harder part. Family emotions could shape the vision for the ceremony, but centuries of royal tradition could not simply be rewritten overnight. A coronation carries deep constitutional, religious, and ceremonial meaning. The legal succession would already have happened, but the coronation would publicly mark the beginning of a new reign. Senior advisors, church officials, household staff, and now faced one difficult question. How much could William change without changing what the coronation itself represented? And William already knew the answer to one thing. His father would not become a forgotten footnote in the ceremony created by his departure. William was not simply inheriting authority. He was also deciding how Britain would remember the end of Charles's reign. During a planning meeting, one small detail caught his attention. A chair had been labeled "Former Sovereign." William stared at the card, picked it up, and tore it in half. He told Anne that Charles could not be reduced to a seating position inside a ceremony made possible by his own decision to step aside. Anne said nothing, but she understood what was behind his reaction. William was carrying guilt. She asked him directly whether his desire to honor Charles came from careful judgment or from discomfort about becoming king. William admitted the guilt was real, but he also said gratitude did not become meaningless simply because the moment was painful. If the monarchy was built on continuity, then the ceremony needed to show where that continuity came from. William approved several changes. The procession would be shorter. The ceremony would place greater focus on public service, and Charles would be formally acknowledged before William took the central coronation oath, the solemn promise through which a new monarch accepts the duties of the crown. To William, the message was clear. His father had not been erased, but the authority had moved forward. Charles, however, made one change of his own. When he saw a proposal for William to thank him publicly from the throne, he crossed it out. Charles told his son that the coronation needed to belong to the new sovereign, not become a ceremony centered on the departing king. William resisted at first, but Charles remained firm. And while the family worked through the emotional meaning of the transition, another reality was already taking shape. Camilla's position was changing too. Schedules were being rewritten. Briefing routes were changing. Staff were receiving new instructions about which documents should go directly to William. Then came one small moment that made the new reality impossible to ignore. An aide arrived carrying the next week's official papers. Instead of placing them on Charles's desk, the aide walked past him. The sovereign documents were taken to the room prepared for William. The transition was no longer just being planned. It was already happening. Charles remained quiet as the machinery of the monarchy slowly moved away from him. Official briefings, constitutional papers, ceremonial approvals, and major engagements were now being sent to William. Constitutional papers are the documents a sovereign receives to carry out formal duties of state. So when those papers stopped arriving at Charles's desk, the transition was no longer just symbolic. The system itself was moving. Charles still had his family, his dignity, and his place within the institution. But the daily machinery of kingship now belonged to someone else. Camilla saw the change too. Her life could no longer revolve around supporting a reigning monarch in the same way. One afternoon, she watched the final official box leave Charles's desk. After the door closed, she asked quietly whether he had expected everything to change so quickly. Charles looked at the empty space and gave a short answer. "It has to." He said nothing more. But that silence said enough. William was struggling from the opposite direction. Advisors wanted his first major meetings to project confidence and momentum. William rejected anything that might look like he was celebrating his father's departure. He told Anne that showing excitement could be misunderstood, and reminded him that accepting responsibility was not the same as enjoying the circumstances that brought it to him. Still, William could not completely escape the feeling. Charles then made the transition even more final. He refused to create a separate shadow court, an unofficial royal structure that could compete with William's authority. Staff connected specifically to the active kingship were transferred, merged, or removed. There would be no second center of power. But Charles made one private request. One red dispatch box from his reign would remain with him, not for official business, but as a personal reminder of the responsibility he had carried. William learned about the request through a household note. Instead of questioning it, he quietly ordered that the box remain untouched. The detail affected him more than he expected. His father was surrendering almost everything connected to the crown, yet keeping one small reminder of what the role had cost him. and noticed William's hesitation. She realized the problem was no longer constitutional. It was personal. So she arranged a private meeting between father and son. No advisors. No folders. No official language. For the first time, William could speak to Charles simply as his son. He admitted that the approaching coronation had started to frighten him, not because he feared becoming king, but because every preparation reminded him of what his father had surrendered. Every discussion about the crown, every rehearsal, every detail of the ceremony seemed connected to Charles's loss. Charles listened without interrupting, and for the first time the future king was no longer speaking as an heir. He was speaking as a son who was afraid of what the crown might cost his father. Charles finally confronted William's guilt. He reminded him that the coronation oath is the solemn promise through which a new sovereign accepts the duties of kingship. Then he told his son something William needed to hear. He had not stepped aside so William could spend his entire reign apologizing for becoming king. Charles had made his decision because he believed the monarchy needed to move forward. William finally admitted what he had been hiding. Part of him had still been waiting for his father to change his mind. Even after the official papers were redirected and coronation plans began, he had imagined that somehow Charles might reverse the decision. Charles quietly explained that this hope was keeping William trapped between two roles. If he kept looking backward, neither of them could fully move forward. Then Charles opened a drawer and removed a folded handwritten note. It was not a political instruction or a secret royal order. It contained only a personal message. Never confuse the crown with the person wearing it. Power could change hands. Duty could change. But the family had to survive both. Charles placed the note in William's hand. For several seconds neither man spoke. Then William stood. He did not call him king. He simply said, "Thank you, Papa," outside and was waiting. William told her there would be no more delays caused by guilt. The coronation would go ahead, not as a celebration of Charles leaving, but as proof that his decision had achieved what he intended. Inside the palace, father and son had finally accepted what was coming. Outside, Britain was only beginning to understand how dramatic the change really was. News broadcasts interrupted regular schedules. Phones filled with alerts. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace. There had been no death and no scandal. Instead, Britain was witnessing something far more unusual. A monarch had voluntarily stepped away from the center of royal life while his successor prepared to be crowned. William watched the reaction quietly. News coverage focused on Charles's permanent withdrawal and support, and the coronation plans already underway. The palace released a transition timetable, showing how responsibilities would move from one sovereign to the next. The message was clear. There would be no long period of uncertainty. The monarchy was moving forward. But William became visibly uncomfortable when one broadcaster described the moment as the beginning of his reign, while speaking about Charles almost entirely in the past tense. Catherine noticed. She quietly switched off the television. William did not object. He only said that the language made it sound as though his father had disappeared, when in reality, Charles had made a choice. Catherine reminded William that it would take time for the public to understand what had happened. But William was no longer sure it would take as long as he feared, and received a different kind of message. Briefing reports showed that public opinion was beginning to view Charles's decision not as defeat, but as an act of restraint. For weeks, Anne had defended her brother inside the palace. Now she was seeing ordinary people understand him too. She lowered one report and quietly admitted that she had feared Charles would be remembered as a king who could not continue. Instead, people were beginning to see him as someone who had chosen to protect the monarchy from uncertainty. Then a single moment changed everything. Outside Buckingham Palace, someone raised a handmade sign above the crowd. "Thank you, Charles. We're ready, William." Applause followed. The message was simple, but its meaning was powerful. The story was no longer being framed as a royal crisis. It was becoming a story about deliberate succession. William watched the crowd on a muted television screen and called Anne into the room. When the sign appeared again, neither spoke. Finally, Anne said, "They understood him." William looked at the screen and nodded. Something inside him finally changed. The country was beginning to understand Charles's decision, allowing the family to focus on what came next. The final coronation plan was approved, built around service, continuity, and responsibility. Charles would be formally acknowledged before William took the central oath. The message was simple. One reign was ending with dignity, while another was beginning with full authority. During the final review, Charles pushed the coronation folder toward William and said, "It is no longer my ceremony to shape." William finally understood that honoring his father did not mean delaying his duty. Charles signed the final approval, then pushed the pen toward his son. William reached for it. The crown had not been taken from Charles. He had deliberately made room for William to carry it forward.